Well, hello there. My name is Christopher Scott, and in this video, I'm going to give you a 5-minute introduction to the Gospel of Mark. So in this video, I'm going to cover 6 aspects of the Gospel of Mark. I'm going to talk about the author of the book. I'm going to talk about the audience that it's written to, the date the book was written. I'm going to give you a brief outline of the book, a key verse of the book, and the theme of the book. So let's go ahead and get started. The Gospel of Mark is the shortest gospel that we have. There are 4 gospels in the Bible: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Mark is the shortest. It's only 16 chapters. And it's good to remember that the gospels were not all written by eyewitnesses of Jesus, right? So there's 4 gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But only 2 of the gospels were written by eyewitnesses of Jesus. People actually were with Jesus, saw Jesus, walked with Jesus, were disciples of him. And those 2 people are Matthew and John. So the bookends of the 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew and John are the 2 disciples of Jesus that saw Jesus, walked with him, spent time with him, ministering with him. Okay, so that's the author of the book of Mark, is Mark. He was a companion of Peter. Peter was one of the disciples of Jesus and has a strong, active role in the book of Acts as a leader of the early church. And so a lot of people will say that Mark likely composed the Gospel of Mark based on Peter's sermons, right? So the Gospel of Mark likely is a summary of Peter's sermons, right? So that's the author of the book of Mark. The audience that it's written to is likely a non-Jewish audience, right? So a Gentile audience, people that aren't Jews or have a Jewish background. And we know that because when you read the Gospel of Mark, it often will explain the Jewish laws, Jewish customs, or some of the Aramaic language that Jews used to speak at that time, right? So an example of that is in Mark 7, chapter 7, verse 3 through 4 here. Let me pull it up. So Mark 7, it says, start with Mark chapter 7, verse 1 says, "One day some Pharisees and teachers of religious law arrived from Jerusalem to see Jesus. They noticed that some of his disciples failed to follow the Jewish ritual of hand washing before eating." And then in verse 3 of chapter 7, it has in parentheses, "The Jews, especially the Pharisees, do not eat until they have poured water over their cupped hands as required by their ancient traditions. Similarly, they don't eat anything from the market until they immerse their hands in water, but this is just one of the many traditions they have clung to, such as their ceremonial washing of pitchers and kettles," right? So we see Mark kind of cruising along describing things, and then he stops and he describes what the Jews did, or what the Pharisees did. He does that again in chapter 14, where Mark's kind of cruising along, and then he stops, he labels a Jewish holiday, and then he explains what's done on the Jewish holiday. So based on some of those hints or clues we have, it's likely that Mark was writing to a Gentile audience or Roman audience that didn't really have a strong Jewish background, right? The date the book was written probably is between 55 AD and 65 AD. It's probably one of the first Gospels written, most likely, but it's not the first book written of the New Testament, right? The first New Testament book written likely is the book of Galatians, which was written in about 49 AD, pretty early on. So Mark is probably the first Gospel written, but not the first book written. An outline from the book that I adapted from Warren Wiersbe's commentary, Be Diligent, kind of outlines the book in 4 ways, 4 categories. The first 13 verses give the presentation of Jesus, who he is. And then the end of chapter 1 through chapter 9 talks about the servant's ministry in Galilee. So Jesus' ministry in Galilee. Then after that, it talks about Jesus' journey to Jerusalem in chapter 10. And then chapters 11 through 16 talks about Jesus' ministry in Jerusalem. So Wiersbe kind of organizes the book based on geography, which is a unique way, I think a helpful way to look at one of the Gospels. So the presentation of the servant first, Jesus' ministry in Galilee first, his journey to Jerusalem, and then his ministry in Jerusalem is how we can organize the book. A key verse to the book of Mark, I believe, and that Wiersbe says, the key verse is chapter 10, verse 45. For Jesus says, "For even the Son of Man," which is Jesus, "came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom to many," right? So that's the key verse. That Jesus came not to be served, but to serve others and give his life as a ransom, to die on behalf of others and be that substitute for our sins so that we can have life with him. The key theme for the book is that Jesus Christ is the servant. That's the key theme. So that's the Gospel of Mark. Just a brief outline, a little information on it. Another way I like to categorize the book is it is a fast-moving book. It's fast, it's action-packed, it moves quickly, there's a lot of active verbs, has a lot of Jesus' actions in it, not as much teachings as some of the other Gospels. So, my name's Christopher Scott. I'm grateful that you got to watch this video. If you have any questions about the book of Mark, I'd love to hear from you in the comments section, and let's talk about the book of Mark together. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, you can do that up here. You can find some other 5-minute introductions to books of the Bible here, and then you can support my YouTube channel and my ministry by going to Patreon down there. Thanks again for watching. Hope to talk to you again soon.